Welcome back everybody, my name is Nick, this is Swiftful Thinking, and in this video, we're gonna start building or rebuilding the Spotify UI in SwiftUI. We're not gonna build all the architecture, we're gonna use mock data, but we're gonna focus on, right now, the home screen of Spotify. We're gonna build other screens as well, but we're gonna start with the home screen. Spotify is just a beautiful user interface. They have a lot of micro interactions, they have some animations, and a really complex home screen. So in this video, we're gonna start to build out that home screen together. Welcome back, everybody. This is where the fun begins. I am hyped because now we're gonna finally be building some fun screens. I don't have to be doing boot camps and teaching all this stuff at a super slow pace. We can just use all the stuff we've learned and rock and roll and build some really beautiful screens here. I am super excited. I hope you are as well. Before we begin, I want to show you guys what we're going to build over this video and the next couple videos as well. So we're building Spotify, or a mock of Spotify. It's very similar to the Spotify UI. There are some differences. For example, we're just going to use the default font. I'm not using any special font here. We have a scroll view here. We have a bunch of topics that we can click on. Obviously, we're not doing anything with them, but we're going to set up the code to do something if we want. When we click on these, we can see a little animation on all these buttons, kind of moves in as you click on them, right? And then if we click on one, we go to a detail screen. We get this really cool detail screen here. I'll do a better one. Maybe this one has a bit of a cooler image here, right? And so this kind of looks very similar to Spotify. We can scroll here and get that nice animation. We get the nav bar coming in at the top here. This is what we're going to be building over the next couple videos. And I think a lot of what we're going to learn in this app is kind of how to set up our views so that we can create really reusable screens like this. Because this is like a really good example of a production level screen where the product team might be constantly changing what is actually on the screen. So for example, different users are going to get different cells up here. Some users might have this cell, some users might not. Being able to customize all of these rows with like different titles and different data, all of those things are important when we are setting up this screen. So we're going to build this UI so that it is like very, very reusable so that we can use it in a real world setting. Obviously, the fake data here doesn't look as good as Spotify's, but I think we're going to get pretty close. And I hope you guys will learn a lot along the way, especially on this screen here. These stretchy headers are awesome. And dealing with the logic for like how to get the navigation bar to come in like this, that's the small details that go a really long way to make a really professional looking app. So this is the first thing we're going to build. I hope you guys are excited, and let's jump into the code. First and foremost, let's add the colors for Spotify. And we're going to do that using the assets folder. This is the approach that I would recommend if you're starting a new project from now on. I'll explain why in a minute. I'm going to go to the assets folder. I'm going to create a quick folder here and just call this Spotify colors, just because we're going to make other apps as well. And we're going to keep the colors in different folders. You don't really need a folder here, but inside that folder, let's create one quick color set. And I'm going to call this one Spotify black. And so when we go to build this app, if we wanted a light and a dark mode, we would create both them here. So I'll open up the navigator so we can create light and dark mode. But for these purposes, we're just going to stick with dark mode because I don't want to spend a crazy amount of time customizing for light and dark mode. It's very simple to add two different colors here, right? But we can just change this to none so that it's always this color, whatever this color is. You guys can go add light and dark mode later, but honestly, who is using Spotify in a light mode? Not me. Anyway, Spotify black. Let's click on it. We're going to come to the right side here. Again, make sure appearances is none. And make sure this is going to be the 8-bit hexadecimal. It's the easiest way to get the hex on the screen here. You could alternatively just show color panel and you go to the RGB sliders and you get the hex in here as well. Or if you wanted to, customize the color yourself. But I like using the hex right here. And the hex for Spotify black will be 121212. A nice black. I'm going to copy this and paste this a couple times. We're going to do the next one's going to be Spotify dark gray. Click on it. And the hex here is going to be slightly different. We're going to go 212121. Very slight gray. Let's take the next one. We're going to call this one Spotify gray. Let's click on that one. All right, this color, we're going to do 535353. Let's change this next one to Spotify green. This should be a recognizable color here. We're going to make this one 1DB954. That looks good. We got a couple more here. We're going to go Spotify light gray. And that hex code will be, we're going to go B3, B3, B3. And last but not least, of course, we need a white. So here we're going to say Spotify white. And this is going to be an off-white, which is going to be E1, EC, E3. And let's delete this last extra one here. I do not know if these are the exact Spotify colors. I just Googled Spotify colors and the hexes came up. You guys are welcome to use your own colors if you want, but close enough for our purposes at least. A couple notes here as we go through this. You will probably notice as you build more apps, most apps are going to avoid using pitch black because it's harder on the user's eyes. So if we did here like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, it looks almost the same, but it makes it much tougher for the user's eyes than a slightly off black. So you'll see most apps are really using like a slight off black. And same thing goes for white. Very rarely apps actually use pure white, FFFFFF. So here Spotify, I guess, is using this color. They actually might not be using this color. Again, I don't really know if it's the right colors or not, but they look good enough for our purposes. And I'll just point out that I'm naming these Spotify black because we're going to add in other colors for other parts of our project here. If this was my full project, I would just name this like theme gray or dark gray or something like that. I don't need like the prefix with the app name every time. The reason that we're adding these colors into the assets folder is because in the new versions of Xcode, we can actually go into our views here and immediately get access to those colors. So for example, here I can say .foreground color, or actually we're supposed to use foreground style now. I can access .Spotify green. So just like that, I have access to the colors and I literally didn't have to write any code for that. So that's why this is the kind of the color setup that I would recommend going forward. And when you're ready to support dark mode, all you do is you go to your colors and you just appearance is dark and then change the dark mode to like some other color and you're good to go. But again, we're not doing dark mode here. Anyway, colors are set up and let's write some code. This is going to be this first screen that we're going to build. We're going to call this the Spotify home screen. So a lot of different reusable parts here, but let's start by just creating the general screen. On my project navigator, I'm going to right click and create a new group. And I'm going to call this one Spotify. All of our Spotify files are going to go in this folder. Let's right click, create another new group. And I'm going to call this core. Some people will call this screens. But I'm also going to create another group in here and call this one components. So all my reusable cells, I'm going to put into the components folder. All of the non-reusable screens, I'm going to put in the core folder. It's just how we're going to stay organized in this project. Now let's right click the core and create a new file, a SwiftUI view, and we're going to call this one SpotifyHomeView. Let's go ahead and click create. Let's get this loaded in here. Make the text a little bigger for you guys. And let's start by adding a background. So we know this is going to be a ZStack. And we're going to make the background color.Spotify black. Because it's a background layer, we'll ignore the safe area. All right, on top of it, first thing we have is this HStack here. We have the user. I hate that this image is a cat. I don't know why the API gives us an image of this animated cat. But this is the user profile image. And then there's a bunch of categories here. And this kind of scrolls. So firstly, we need to make this scroll view. And that scroll view is going to contain a cell here for each of these categories, a scroll view, and then an HStack that includes the scroll view as well as this icon here. I'm going to create an HStack, open the brackets. So HStack on the left is going to be the user profile image. So here I'll add an image loader view. If you don't have image loader view, you weren't with me in the last video. So check out that setup video if you want. Let's give this a frame, make it nice and small, maybe 30 by 30. And And of course, we want to add a clip shape of circle so that it's actually a circle. Before we add the clip shape, I'm just going to give it a quick background of, let's go .Spotify white. Just in case the image has some sort of transparency, it's a PNG or something, we'll still see just a white circle there, then it bleeding through. And then I'm going to add an on tap gesture. We're not going to do anything with it right now, but this will be some action if the user clicks on it, go to the profile screen or something like that. When we load up the SpotifyHomeView, we want to actually load the user profile. So up here, I'm going to create an @state private var. We'll just call this current user of type user, make it optional, set it equal to nil. And in here, we're going to say if let current user. So if we get the current user, let's put this onto the screen and we'll pass in here the URL string of the current user dot image. Cool. The last thing I want to do is actually load in a current user. So on this screen, I'm going to add a task. And if you're with me in the last video, we actually spent some time creating our content view. We created some fake functions to get data. So I'm going to copy this get data function and I'm just going to jump back to my SpotifyHomeView. And here we're just going to create we're going to pass in this function. We don't have products yet. I'll just comment it out. And we don't have users. We just have one user. So I'm just going to set the current user equal to the result of get users dot first. So we got the first user. We'll just make our current user for now. And here, let's just await get data. All right, this should be working here. Image is loading, got our little cat. And on the right of that is this scroll view, right? So we have a scroll view here with a bunch of cells in it. So I'm going to create on the right side of this in the H stack, a scroll view. Let's use the horizontal. Looks like this is now deprecated. So we're going to do this one here, horizontal, open the brackets. And we're going to add .scroll indicators of hidden because we don't want to see the scroll indicator. And when I create scroll views, oftentimes I like to start by just creating fake cells in the scroll view. So we're going to do a H stack here with spacing of 8, open the brackets. Let's go for each 0 ... less than 20. We're just going to do an underscore in. Just going to put on the screen a rectangle with a frame of 10 by 10. Delete these. And I just like doing this just so that I can see on the screen what it looks like real quick. So clearly it's working and it should be scrollable. All right, now we need to make a bunch of cells. And you're going to see here that these cells, it's going to be the same cell 5 times or a bunch of times, no matter, depending on how many categories there are. And there's going to be some logic for like if the cell is selected or not. And so because this cell is going to have multiple states, it's going to have an unselected state as well as a selected state. Because it needs multiple states, it's probably going to be easier for me to make this a reusable component so that I can manage the state of the cell in its own file. So a good indicator here of like when we created this profile image, there's not multiple states to it. It's very simple. I can just write that code in my screen. But if I have multiple states, it's often easier to make this a nice reusable component. So let's make this a reusable component before moving forward. Create a new file, open up the navigator. In our component section, let's right click, create a new file. I'm going to call this one a Spotify category cell and click create. Again, if this was my actual project, I would just call it category cell. But because we're going to have a bunch of different kind of mock apps in the same project, I just want to be clear this one is for Spotify. Cool. So let's get the preview working here. I'm going to put the preview in a ZStack and I'm going to give it a color.black.ignore safe area in the background because we know the home screen is going to have that black background. I want to make sure that this looks good on that dark background as well. The category cell is really, really simple. We can see it's just, there's 2 states. There's a selected state, unselected state, as well as some text and a background. So in here, let's just create that real quickly. Firstly, let's inject the text. So we're going to say var title of type string. And I'll set it equal to music as the first category for now. Put the title on the screen. I'm going to give this a font of callouts and let's give it a foreground style of .red for a second, just so that we can see it. It's on the screen. So we want to add some background to it. Firstly, let's do the non-selected state. So we have the gray background with the white text. So let's pass in a value for var is selected of type Boolean, set it equal to false for now. And we're going to say dot background. If it is selected, the background will be dot Spotify green. Otherwise, we'll do Spotify dark gray. Same thing for the foreground style. We'll do, if it is selected, we'll do Spotify black. Otherwise, Spotify white. All right, I'm gonna get rid of this foreground style of red here. And let's come down here to the cell on the preview and make a VStack. Let's go spacing of maybe 40. I'm gonna paste this a couple times. This first one, let's just add in the custom title. Let's just say title goes here. I'm doing this just so that we know that the title initializer is working. On this one, we're gonna do the same thing. I'll copy that, and is selected will be true. And this one, I'm just gonna set is true. So the default text with is selected state. We have the default non-selected, selected, and a third version. Add some padding to it. So before we have the background, we want to push the background outside of the text. So here I'm going to add some padding. Let's do dot vertical first, 8. And then let's do padding of dot horizontal. Let's do 10. Oftentimes horizontal padding is a little bit bigger than the vertical padding. And let's add a quick corner radius on here of 16. I know corner radius is like deprecated and we technically shouldn't be using it and use clip shape instead, but I'm going to be using corner radius until it doesn't work anymore because it's absolutely ridiculous that they have gotten rid of corner radius. Such a basic thing to have in a UI framework. And this is looking pretty good for our cell states. Let's go back to our Spotify home view. And we're going to put on the screen here, we're going to put a category cell with the title and is selected. So title and is selected, and we don't have these values yet. So for title, I'm just going to put some title for a second. And then is selected, let's just make false, just so this loads up real quick. Let's get rid of the frame and the fill. Cool. Looks like this is starting to look better. Firstly, we want to get our categories here. So in deciding what type of data model to make our categories, we're basically going to decide between a struct or an enum. When I look at this from a developer's perspective, I need to think about, do I have all of these categories at compile time? While I'm developing, do I know what all of these categories are? If I know them all, then I'm going to use an enum. If I don't know what these are, if I have to fetch them or they're going to get customized all the time, then I'm going to use a struct. But I know what these 4 categories are, so we're going to use an enum here. So let's open up the navigator into our Spotify folder. I'm just going to create a new group called models. These are just specific models for the Spotify. I'll right click, create a new file, a Swift file, and I'll call this category. So a category will be an enum called category. And we'll open the brackets, and we're going to have a case for all, for music, for podcasts, and for audio books. Let's give this a string so we have a raw value of all music, podcasts, and audiobooks. And let's make this case iterable so that we can create an array to loop on all of these. So when I jump back to my Spotify home view now, I'm going to loop through the category.allCases. Again, case iterable makes this all cases appear. And these all cases are not identifiable, but when we created the category, we gave each one a string so it has a raw value. So you can actually use the ID of self, which references that string as the raw value. So because they all have different raw values, they are then therefore hashable. So this will be each category in, and now we can put on the screen that raw value, category.raw value. Looks a little bit better. Let's make that dot capitalized so that it's a little more professional looking. Is selected. Let's create a state so that we can tell if one of these is selected or not. So up at the top of my screen, I'm going to create nat state private var. We'll say selected category of type category. Make it optional, set it equal to nil. and is selected. And the value for is selected will be if the category, so this category here, is equal to the selected category at the top of our screen. And now all I'm going to do is make this an on tap gesture. So if I click on one of these, I will set the selected category equal to the category that we are looping on. Just like that, I can now click these and they are working. I am noticing here that this all button is really, really small, and I don't like that. I think it should be a little bit bigger. Even though there's less text, it should be a little bit bigger than that. It's kind of a bad UI. You can imagine people with really big fingers might have trouble tapping it. So what I'm going to actually do is go back into the cell and just, let's make this all just so that we can see that use case really small. And I'm just going to give this frame with a minimum width of 35. So even if it is that small, and at least has a minimum width, so it's a little bit bigger, I think that looks a little bit better. Let's jump back to the home view, check it out, and it's looking pretty good to me. One thing I'm noticing here is as the image is loading in, it kind of pops in. You'll see that it pops in and moves everything to the right. And I don't like that it's shifting the entire scroll view when the image loads in. So what we're going to do is actually create here a ZStack. I'm going to put this inside the ZStack, and then I'm going to take the frame of the image and put it on the ZStack. So this frame will always be on the view, even if the image is not loaded yet. So we can see here, it now just pops in a little smoother. I think that's a better user experience for our users. All right. There is spacing on this HStack, and we can actually see it. You can see here, there's a little line. It's hard to see because it's black on black, but if I make this maybe colored out red, we can see really quickly where the black kind of cuts off. There's a lot of spacing in between those. And I don't really like how that looks, how it just cuts off kind of so harshly. Actually, I want to make this a little bit bigger as well, so it kind of matches the size of these. So let's make this maybe 35 by 35. Now I want to move this scroll view so it's closer to the button. So what we're going to do here is actually, firstly, let's decrease this spacing in here. So this spacing is coming from the parent HStack spacing here. Like let's do 16. We can see it push out more. And now if we put it down to 0, it should be nice and close. So now it's kind of going right into the image. It's a little closer for sure, but now it looks bad in the default state. So what I'm going to do is add padding on the HStack inside the scroll view. So rather than between the components within this component itself, let's just add some padding, maybe horizontal of 16. Now it starts out here, but it still scrolls closer to the image, which looks a little bit better, just generally speaking. All right, what I'm going to do, let's zoom out here a little bit. I'm going to now take this component, this HStack, and I'm going to cut it. Let's come down into our code and make a private variable, call it header of type SomeView, and paste in our header here and put our header back on the screen. This is going to make it just much easier to play around with the actual header and move it around in our code, just moving this in our code rather than all of this. It also makes it much easier to read as we start to make this screen much more complex. All right, let's make this look a little more like the actual Spotify home screen here. So we know this is a massive scroll view. So let's first put this in a scroll view. I'm going to come up here and in my header, let's put a scroll view. Let's use the axis of vertical, the scroll indicators, visibility of hidden. Put our header inside real quick. As I said earlier, whenever I create a scroll view, I really like to just put fake cells in at the start so we can see what's going on. Let's do a for each, 0 to less than 20. For each item in, we'll add in a quick rectangle with a frame of 200 by 200, just so that we can see it. So we got our scroll view here. Obviously it's scrolling, but there's nothing sticking to the top. In our actual app, we want to make this a pinned header so that it is stuck at the top while the user scrolls. And what that tells me is I should probably try to use a component that natively has headers stuck to the top. There are ways to customize and build your own. In some of the future videos in this playlist, we're going to build our own custom headers. But I know that this actually is supported out of the box in SwiftUI using a LazyVStack. We can pin the header to the top. So what we're going to actually do is create a LazyVStack here. And we can see that there's pinned views in the initializer. I'm going to hold the Option button and click Enter. We're not going to use the alignment. For spacing, I'm going to just set it to 0 for now. And then for the pinned views, of course, we want to pin these section headers. So because we are using section headers, we now need to make sure that this header is the header for a section. So in here, we're going to create a section. And when you create a section, you can create footers or headers. We can see the header in here. I'll click Enter. So for the content, I'm just going to put my squares for a second. And for the header, I will obviously put our header. All right, so now these all look like one cell. Let's just put spacing of 1 for a second. All right, so now as I scroll, since this is the header for this entire section, while I'm scrolling across this section, which is the entire scroll view, the header is going to stay constant, which is really nice. Let's do a little more customization here. Firstly, this top row is very, very close to the actual top of the screen, almost too close. So on this LazyVStack, let's just add some padding of maybe a top of 8. Just to push the whole thing down a little bit of breathing room, if you will. And then I want to add some padding inside this actual header, because obviously it's like right on the edge of the device. That doesn't look very good. So I'm going to jump down to the header quickly, and outside the header at the bottom of it, down here, let's add some padding. I'm going to start with maybe a vertical padding of 24. Let's see how that looks. I think that looks a little bit better. And then I want to add horizontal padding as well. Now, if I add here, I'm going to do padding dot horizontal of 8. I'm now putting this entire component within 8 pixels from the edge of the frame. So if I add a background of color dot blue, we can see here the actual frame, or sorry, let's put it before the padding. We can see that it's 8 from the edge of the device. But the problem is when you do this with a scroll view, my scroll view is now getting cut off 8 pixels from the edge of the device. It's not going to the edge of the device. That's a bad UI. So what I'm actually going to do, just to keep this one simple, is I'll leave the padding leading of 8, but I'll let the right side actually trail to the edge of the device. So that can go fully to the edge. I'm going to cut the color .blue for a second. The next problem is, of course, that as we scroll, we can see our cells through the header. And if you look at how we actually want the final product, as these scroll up, we want to cut it off. We don't want it to actually go past and through the header like these cells are here. So a couple things we're going to do to fix that. First and foremost, we want to add a background to the header. So let's add our color .blue here. So a little bit better. And now you can see it's still going up here. All right. So by default, the scroll view clearly ignores the safe area. And that's generally a good thing. It's generally what we want. But I want to actually clip the scroll view so that it's only inside the safe area, so it doesn't actually extend to the top of the screen. So on the scroll view, a little trick, we can just add a quick clipped modifier. So now it's going to be clipped at the top edge here. But I'm not concerned about that right now because in Spotify, there's actually like a tab bar down there and it doesn't really matter. So we're going to clip to the top so it doesn't go behind that top area. And I want to just point out here, like this is how I actually build screens in production. I use these hard colors and I go step by step. And I highly recommend when you're starting to build these screens, literally start with the basics, like put in fake cells, put in fake colors. And that's the fastest way to build SwiftUI views. Eventually, if you do this enough, like all these like scroll view problems and things, you get really familiar with and you know exactly what problems are going to occur before they actually occur. I'm going to change the background color back to Spotify black. I'm going to change the header color back to, instead of blue, we're going to do color.Spotify black as well. And then for these cells that are on the screen, because it's black on black, let's just give them a fill color.red. This is already looking a little bit better, closer to our actual product. And I really like that the title kind of scrolls down and then it gets caught at the top. That looks really nice. I'm going to add here just navigation bar hidden. Well, actually, that's deprecated, right? Nav bar hidden is deprecated. Use toolbar hidden instead. Super annoying, Apple. Come on. Toolbar hidden for the nav bar. Just because I know that we're using this at the top, we're never going to have a nav bar here. I don't ever want that scenario in my code base. All right. That is it for this video. We got our Spotify home view started, but we got a lot more stuff to go. Thank you all for watching. As always, my name is Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.